Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg. You can see that it's getting cold in the Northeast because I'm suddenly wearing one of my flannel shirts. And of course, it's getting towards the end of the year when everybody who does pen reviews starts doing sort of wrap up and talking about the pens that they like the best of the year. Um, it's always kind of difficult because this has been the year for me of just going crazy about getting into the pen habit, and I've gotten quite a few different pens, mostly used, mostly very reasonably priced. And actually, in the last month or so, I've really found some that have been favorites. I think that's because as I've become more and more involved with fountain pens, I began to realize what I really like. I think you go through a process. You start in the beginning, and I've been using fountain pens since I was in high school, but a very occasional way, and using them to draw with in sketchbooks, and usually using for a long period of time just using like disposable fountain pens or cheap Schaefer student fountain pen, which I liked. I think I've shown it on the channel that I like drawing in a sketchbook and then watercoloring afterwards, and I actually even like the way the ink kind of bleeds. And in fact, you can do really well with, let's say, a Pilot Varsity pen. But then I became increasingly obsessed. I had a period sort of in 2017 when I was really into fountain pens, and that sort of lapsed, and then I came back to it again this year. And when I was starting out again, I became sort of obsessed with finding pens that were had flex nibs. And then also, I thought for drawing, the best thing was to get pens that had a very fine line. I had this sort of idea in my head that what you were trying to do with a fountain pen was to get a line that might be equivalent to a very fine dip pen, forgetting in a way that one of the great pleasures of using a fountain pen, at least for me, is the way the ink kind of just sort of comes out of the pen and it floats across the paper. That to me is really the joy of fountain pen. It's certainly the joy of writing with a fountain pen. And typically, the finer the line is, the more likely the pen is to be scratchy. That isn't always the case, but I think that's particularly the case with less expensive fountain pens. And then also I found as I began to use the pen and journal again with the pen that I really was enjoying medium nibs. I like seeing the shading of the ink, and that you don't really see that with a very fine line, but you do see that as you begin to get into the mediums, and even for some people broad. Broad is too thick for me, and my handwriting isn't good enough, I think, to write with a broad. And I also have some trouble using, let's say, a stub. Sometimes I enjoy that, but I like using stub nibs and italic nibs as in a few pens. I've demonstrated this, and then getting a variety of different line widths in a drawing. I think that's really cool. And then I like using a very fine pen with another pen to get variety. But I don't so much like to rely on just a fine or extra fine line. So for me, medium nibs tend to be the thing that I enjoy the most, particularly if I'm writing in my journal. So it takes a long time to sort of figure that out, what it is that you like. And I think also it changes, and also it's different for different pens, which of course is the joy of this whole process. So what I'd like to do today is not just choose one pen that I thought was the best of 2022, but several pens, but they all sort of do different things and sort of appeal, I think, to different people depending what you're looking for. I start with a very inexpensive pen and go through some of the other pens, working my way up to fairly expensive. But I should say that the more expensive the pen, the more it is likely that I am going to have bought it used on eBay. it's really only the inexpensive pens that I tend to buy new, and it is, as I say, the older pens and the more expensive pens that I get on eBay. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do writing samples because that's takes too much time. But for each one of these pens, I did a drawing of a rose, and I thought that was a nice way to kind of celebrate the end of the year with different roses. And for the most part, I use different colored inks to do that. Another thing that came up this year, I think, is sort of comparison for me, the differences between using a new pen and a vintage pen. And I think they both are kind of interesting and wonderful. I discovered some pen experts, and I went to the Commonwealth Pen Show, and I got a beautiful Waterman 72 pen from John Corrin, who specializes in flexi pens, and it really draws beautifully, and it also writes beautifully. I know that he doesn't feel this way, but it does, because it's expensive and it is an eyedropper. It's not a kind of pen that I would take with me on the road or use just as a casual sketch pen. So that's something to keep in mind. But I do really enjoy it, and I think it is a wonderful pen for making art. So why don't I start with that pen, and I still kept the little piece of paper on it that George Corwin does. It's very simple pen. It isn't terribly fancy. It's made out of this wonderful ebonite rubber, which doesn't necessarily look so great, but feels wonderful in your hand. It has this very simple design in terms of the clip, and on the top it says the number. So it's a very simple pen, and it has a beautiful, I think, number 2 nib, which I think one of the reasons why it writes so beautifully is because John has tuned it, and he really is a master at making pens that write beautifully. So this is a lovely, I think, wonderful pen, and it's made me very happy. Another pen that I have really, I feel actually that this is a sleeper pen. This is the Platinum Century 376. It comes in this beautiful color. This is a burgundy color, so the pen itself is transparent, and it's kind of hard to see that on here, but it has a lovely translucency to it. It's rather dark, so it's actually a bit hard to see when you hold it up to the light to see how much ink you have in it. It is a pen that works with a converter. And this is a very, very popular pen. I read somewhere that the Century 3776 line, which you can get in so many different kinds of nibs and different finishes, is the most popular pen line in Japan. Platinum, of course, is a Japanese pen company, certainly among the most popular. I've also heard that they're changing the design. But anyway, I think it's a classic cigar-shaped design. What is fantastic about this pen is the nib, and I've reviewed this before. It has a ultra extra fine nib, and I, for example, had this capped, inked for well over, I think, 2 months since I've used it, and you uncap it and it works perfectly. There's no problem starting it up. That's very typical of Platinum pens, first of all. So that's a great thing about it. And then it draws with this very smooth but absolutely consistent fine line that is sort of almost like a rapidograph line. But of course, and when I was younger, I used to use rapidographs, and for people who don't know, that a rapidograph has almost like a wire-like point, and it uses ink, Indian ink, but it's incredibly difficult to keep your rapidographs clean. You have to make sure that they don't dry out. They easily bend. But they have a very, very consistent line. The great thing about this is that it gives you such a consistent line, but it also is easy to clean out and change, with a converter, and it's very, very reliable. And also, it is a gold nib, 14 karat gold nib, and so it has a little bit of a bounce. But I wouldn't use this pen, at least in this super fine line, as a journaling pen. I suppose you might if you were writing with very small hand. I know that there are people who like to write with very, very tiny, and this would be a good pen. But in terms of drawing, I have used this with a platinum medium nib, and the combination is, I think, really, really great. Here's another sleeper, I think. This is a pen that is by Conklin. Now, Conklin is, like Waterman, one of the storied historical fountain pen companies. The thing about Conklin is that it actually went out of business, I think, in the 1950s, but the name has been bought up by, I guess, Jaffa Brands, and they have revived the company, and they make a whole series of very affordable pens that I think are beautiful, that are designed in emulation of classic pens. I think they're really great for I think they're for the value of them. Recently, the whole bunch of them have been very sharply discounted on eBay, new models. This is unusual for them because most of their pens are converter fillers. This is a piston filler, and it's modeled after a vintage pen called the Word Gauge. And the idea of this pen, it's hard to see this, I will do a close-up of it as well, but it has numbers along the barrel, and the numbers are supposed to relate. But anyway, depending on how fast you write, it's supposed to tell you how many words you have left. It's almost like a gas tank telling you. And I think that's a bit of a gimmick, but this pen works really wonderful. I love the way it looks. I love the way it feels. I always like pens that sort of show you how much ink they have in them and are sloshing around. And the other thing about this pen is that it takes a number 6 nib, and I've been able to switch the nib and put a fountain pen Revolution nib, which I Ultraflex nib, onto the pen, and it works pretty well with that nib. So then you get a piston filler with a lot of ink and the Fountain Revolution nib. Right now, it has the Jovo Omniflex nib on it. Now again, that is a nib that people don't like. There's a lot of criticism of it because it doesn't really flex very much, but it does flex somewhat. It's something like, it goes really from a kind of Western fine to, let's say, almost a bold. And so there's not a tremendous amount of flex, but it's very, very smooth. I really like it for writing, and I like it for drawing. So I think this is a great pen. It's reasonable. Well, it depends on where you get it. I got this one for probably around $60 on eBay. I think it may list in the $100 range. And to be honest, I'm not sure if they still make this model. But anyway, I really enjoy this pen. And I really collect all the Conklin pens, even though I realize that they are imitations of older pens. They give me a lot of pleasure. I just think they look great. They come in really beautiful boxes. I enjoy them. Next is one of my all-time favorite pens. This is the Fountain Revolution pen. I've spoken praise this in another review. In terms of drawing, it has the Falcon Revolution Ultraflex nib on it. It is a really very wet pen. It keeps up with the nib. It has an ebonite feed. It is sold by Kevin, who's the guy who runs Fountain Pen Revolution. Truth in advertising, I sometimes have had problems with the initial pen that I've gotten from FPR, but you contact Kevin and he makes sure that you're happy. They have incredible sales all the time, so if you put your name on their newsletter, and they let you know about those sales. And I also think that it's incredibly beautiful pen. It has this beautiful translucent acrylic, so it's a very beautiful looking pen. It writes well. It also uses a converter. On sale, the pen is around with somewhere around $40. It depends with the Ultraflex nib, and you sort of decide different options. You can get it with a regular nib, a medium nib, and it's less money. And then there's a flex nib that doesn't flex as much as the Ultraflex. And then the Ultraflex nib is expensive. Sometimes they have sales where it's 2 for 1. So if you have a friend, that would be probably the least expensive way to get the pen. Or if you want two of them, that's a cool thing. Anyway, I strongly recommend Magnus pen, and actually, I think the Fountain Pen Revolution Ultraflex is so good that I don't really quite get why these other competitors, all the claims they tend to make, and this, at least in my experience, in terms of metal flex pens, they really do the best at it. In a way, as good as a Pilot nib, but they're different. The Pilot pens, the way they flex, I think, is more oriented for people who are writing, and I think for the needs probably of Japanese writers and calligraphers. So I think their pens, in a way, perhaps are more reliable in the way they flex, maybe. I don't know. I like all of them, and I've done some reviewing of that, and I'm sure next year I will revisit the different flexing options. I have come to realize, though, that this sort of need to have a pen that does everything, that does thin, thick, every kind of line, at least for drawing, is perhaps not the best goal. That maybe the best thing to do is to use several pens, and that's why I've had some reviews of calligraphy sets where you can, the idea is to do a drawing with 3 different pens, because to me that's very similar to the way in which an artist uses different paintbrushes, right? I would never think to do a painting with just one paintbrush. I get it when sketching, out, maybe you don't want to bring that many pens, and you also have the problem that when the cap is open, that dries out. So there are reasons why people want just one pen to do everything. But as I say, I think that's becoming, for me, not necessarily the ultimate goal. I have 2 more pens still to go. So this year was the year for me of Penbbs. If you follow reviewers, everybody kind of agrees that they make fantastic pens. And they make such a variety of pens, and they variety of prices. So far for me, the 456, which is a vacuum filler and comes in many different finishes, is my favorite. Their nibs are really great. They write really, really smoothly. I also appreciate the fact that they are experimenting with all kinds of different filling systems and different designs, so it's not, as I say, they're not just taking a pen body and putting a Yovo nib on it, which is nothing wrong with it. I mean, after all, that's what Conklin does. One of the things that Conklin does, actually, which I like, is that their pens, many of their pens, you can screw the nib off and then put on a different a nib just by screwing the whole section off, or the nib housing, I guess is the right word. And you could just screw it off and change them. I like that fact about Conklin. Anyway, Penbbs is incredibly reliable. They're really nice writers. They feel wonderful in the hand. The vacuum filler, which is around $45 to $50, has the advantage of having that you can close it. So if you're on an airplane, it supposedly air pressure is not going to make it leak, and that's good if you fly a lot. While if you had a pen with a converter, that wouldn't be the case. It could leak. So that's something that's cool. You have to remember that when you want to travel, that you close the pen on the back, you turn it, and then when you write, you have to open it up so that the ink from the barrel will flow into the pen. That's just something you have to remember. That's not a huge problem. And these pens hold tremendous amount of ink, so that's really nice. I love demonstrators. So this is a terrific pen. And then finally, in the last week, I got what a lot of people call the Grail pen. I got a Pelikan M800. I was able to get a good deal on a gently new one, or what was called a refurbished pen. You hear about a pen being so great, and you sort of wonder, well, how great could it be? How well could it write? Is it really that much better? Because every pen that I've shown you so far writes really, really well, right? And is a pleasure to use. Maybe the Ultra Extra Flex, maybe the Platinum Century Ultra Fine is not so great for writing for me, but it works very well as a drawing pen. But, so I got the pen, and I started to write with it, and oh my goodness, it writes so smoothly. It just floats across the page. And at the same time, it has, it's not a flex pen, but it has a lovely sort of bounce to it, and it does have different line weights to it, and it's just an incredible pleasure to use this pen. It's also a beautiful pen. I have fairly large, fat hands, and I think the size of the pen is perfect. It really is just fantastic. Unlike a Mont Blanc, the nibs housing screws off, which allows you to fairly easily clean it out. So, you can clean it out from the top of the pen, and that's nice without having to take the whole pen apart. I'm not quite sure how one does that with the Pelikan, to tell you the truth. So I've gotten the pen new, and I don't think I would risk, well, not new, I got it refurbished. I don't think I'd risk it to take it apart. But anyway, and also it's a piston filler, but the piston just goes up and down with just the smoothest of action. It's just a beautiful pen. It has a beautiful nib. I myself have not officially reviewed it. There are so many reviews of this pen online. It's classic, and I'm very, very pleased. It was sort of my early Christmas present, was getting this pen. So at least from my standpoint, it seems that the hype about this pen seems to be true, seems to be the case. And finally, I want to end with another pen that there have been a lot of reviews about, and I've only gotten it very recently. I haven't had a chance to review it. This is the Hongdian Black Forest pen. It also comes in a lot of other different colors. Well, not a lot. It comes in green and blue, and it's a metal pen, but it's relatively light, and it has a really nice nib, and I really love the way it feels in the hand, and it writes very smoothly. It was only $16, and it's absolutely elegant to look at. It posts beautifully, very securely. It's just it has a lovely little finial at the top. It's just a lovely pen. I think they used to be even cheaper, last year, but $15 is not a lot for a pen like this. So I think it's an amazing deal. Listen to how nicely it clicks together, really beautiful, and it really feels nice in the hand. It's not unlike the Muji pen. So much so that I wonder if the same people make those two pens. But where the Muji pen has this, it's at least in my hand so much more uncomfortable. This is slightly tapered. The the feel here of the barrel, I feel, feels very nice in the hand, and then when you actually grip the pen, it's kind of smooth but not slippery, and it just feels really nice. Well, the Muji pen looks great, but feels horrible. I just can't write with it or use it for very long. If you follow my channel, you'll know that I took the lovely nib from the Muji pen and I put it into the Boston Safety pen. So anyway, this would be, at least for now, my inexpensive, I'm not going to say cheap because I don't think it's cheap, inexpensive pen, keeping in mind that I've only used it for about a week, so I'm not sure, how well it holds up. This is a converter pen. You know, some people have said this. You really can't beat a converter for the way of filling a pen because they're easy to clean out. You're easy to change. You can, decide that you want to use different color inks. I think the converter filling system really is the best of all. But it's not glamorous, and it's not interesting, it's not fun, because you get sort of bored with it. And when you're a pen collector, you kind of want variety and interesting, different modes. I think that's one of the reasons why Penbbs is so popular among a lot of the pen people, because they keep coming out with a different filling mechanisms, and it's really fascinating. There is another issue with vintage pens is that some of the filling systems with the vintage pens, like the lever filler, is I have issues with it. So a lot of vintage pens, like the Waterman 52, have lever filler, and you don't know when they run out of ink. I mean, the same thing is true of the Waterman 72, which I should say is a very rare pen, kind of hard to find. It's an eyedropper filler, so it holds a lot of ink, but you don't know necessarily when it runs out of ink. A good friend of mine was saying, though, that he knows when his pens are running out of ink. He's so used to using his vintage pens that he knows, he can kind of feel it. But I'm not so connected yet to my pen that I sense that moment. Okay, so that's the run through. Let me show them all to you as a group. So this is the Waterman 72. This is the Conklin Word Gauge. I always want to say world gauge, but it's definitely word gauge because remember it has the numbers along the barrel that are supposed to relate, I guess, to the number of words that you can write with. Here is the Platinum Century 3776. Here is the Fountain Pen Revolution Himalaya with the Ultraflex nib. Here is the Penbbs. It's down, I guess. 456 demonstrator. And here is the Pelikan M800. And finally, actually the pen that looks the most different is the Hongdian Black Forest. I just put it over here. It's interesting to see them all together. It's interesting to me because you see that they're all around the same size. You begin to see the kind of pen that I like. The Penbbs is I guess the longest. And for the most part, I kind of like the cigar shape of a pen, of a fountain pen. That's the thing I like the best. It's a nice group. It is seven pens. Seven's a lucky number. So that's it. What I'm going to do is show you the videos of the drawings that I did, the quick rose drawings. If you enjoyed this video, this review of 2022, of my 2022 pens, please subscribe. That's the way that you can support the channel. This is the Waterman 72, and I'm using diamond chocolate brown ink here. You can see the line variation quite distinctly and get a, goes pretty much from a kind of fine to broad. It bounces. It's just very lovely the way it works. This is the Platinum Century 376. You get this very fine line. And there's just a little bit of variation, and it's very sensitive. It's really a lovely, lovely line. It reminds me of some of the line that David Hockney has in some of his drawings. And it does a very great job of doing cross-hatching, I think. I think you can hear my cat crying in the background. This is the word gauge. But before that was platinum ink, black ink. This is Pilot. Here is Yusuki Gu. It's red ink. This is the Penbbs. This is also Pilot. It's in that line. It's one of the blue inks. Penbbs, the 456. And this doesn't flex at all, but it's very reliable, and it's very nice bold line. This is the wonderful Pelikan M800, and I think you can see that it does flex a bit, and it just just floats on the page. This is Waterman Blue Serenity ink. And it's just a pleasure to use this pen. And this is the Black Forest, the Hongdian. And it's a diamond Aurora Borealis, a greenish color. This is very nice too. There's no skipping. It draws very, very reliably.